I'm really not that infirm, right? I had a knee replacement. And I'll just give you a little bit of background about my relationship with Ken Sim. And after I left the park board, I became the BIA coordinator for the Carricksville Business Association. And Ken was on our board, and so I knew him quite well. He ran Nurse Next Door, very entrepreneurial. And so when he decided he was going to run for mayor the first time, he made, an announcement that he was going to get rid of the elected park board. And he didn't get the nomination, but then when he came to us, the Carricksville Business Association, to talk to us about his imminent run the second time, the question I asked him first was, well, what about the Vancouver Park Board? Because if you're going to eliminate the Vancouver elected park board, then I'm going to really mount a campaign against you. And he said, oh, no, I'm not getting rid of the park board. No, I promise. And he lied. So that tells you one thing, and I'm never going to get over it, but it was a terrible thing to do, because when you look back at the history of the city, 138 years ago, in 1886, what was the almost first thing that the council did? The council said, we want to petition the federal government for the military reserve, which was almost 1,000 acres, which is what we know as Stanley Park now, for a park. This is for a population of about 6,000 people. It was an unheard of thing to do, and in North America at that time, amazing. So they did that. They petitioned the federal government. I mean, they didn't do it for the right reasons, of course. The reasons they did it was that 3 of the people on council, 3 greenhorns as they were called, were all developers. And they had land all near Stanley Park that they wanted to develop, and they wanted a park nearby. It was all about capitalism, really. So it didn't matter, because 2 years later, they decided to appoint a park board that would take care of this park and any subsequent parks that came along. And then 2 years after that, in 1890, they made it an elected park board. So they basically set up something that was going to be in friction with them for the next 136 years. And it's been like that ever since. And the reason there was friction was because City Council was abstemious with money. They never gave the park board any money, very rarely. Park board always had to go hat in hand. And when I was researching, going back in my notes today about, well, why didn't they, when they made the Vancouver Charter, why didn't they give a mill rate levy so there'd be a percentage of the budget that would automatically go to the park board? Because this was done in many cities across the United States at that time. And of course, that didn't happen. And they tried like 3 times to make that happen over the next 100 years, but it always got rejected by City Council. So always they were in a position of asking for more money. And sometimes they got it. It depended on the government that was in power, and sometimes they didn't. But it was really interesting looking back over my notes and books today about all the kinds of things that the park board did that were so sneaky to get money. One of the things they did, I'm sure you all know that the city of Vancouver was amalgamated in 1929. There was South Vancouver, Vancouver, and Point Grey. And before the amalgamation, the park board itself went to both of those, South Vancouver and Point Grey municipalities, and said, listen, if you've got any spare land or land you wanted to develop as a park, make a decision now, vote on it now while you're still your own municipality, so when it comes to Vancouver, it's not their land, it'll be the park board land. And they did that, and they came with a lot of land, the biggest land dump into the city of Vancouver in 1929. And that was a really, really interesting thing. And just a note, because people always complain about street trees on the east side opposed to the west side, Point Grey was planting trees dozens of years before South Vancouver, East Vancouver, downtown Vancouver. So those trees came into the amalgamation already maybe 50 or 40 years old. So that's why there's larger trees over there. It wasn't some diabolical plot by the park board. They came that way. Anyway, so through the years, this constant cap in hand, but then we had some really good times. And one of the best times was around the time I started at the park board in 1973. I was fresh out of university in Washington, D.C. as a communications person. I married my husband, I came here, so I went down to Manpower, and they said, you know, on the board it said playground leader. I always was a counselor, you know, in my summers back in New York, so I took the playground leader job. And from then, they told me they had a communications job opening up as public information officer, and so that's how I started my career. I thought I'd stay a couple of years because, you know, did I really want to be involved in parks and recreation, you know? I wanted to work for a big company. Well, I was completely won over by what we call the green line. Stuart LaFoe, I was, you know, educated at his, whatever you would call it. He would call me the information girl, and I never got mad because he was from a different generation, and I liked him. But he used to always famously say, and he was the president of the International Federation of Parks and Recreation Association worldwide, that a city is not known for its great buildings, but the spaces in between. And he's so right. Yeah. And the thing is that being brought up in this sort of wonderful generation that was just, there was just a generational change that was happening when I came. And people like Bill Livingston, who built Van Nuysen Gardens and built Queen Elizabeth Park and the entrance to Stanley Park. He designed so many wonderful things. They were all retiring, and they'd been there for 30 years, 35 years. So I was around all these people, and they would tell us all about what had happened. Like Bill Livingston would tell me, you know, one day I got a call down at the park, and it was from the people who were building the Mac Low building, and they had to get rid of some fill, right? And they said, do you want some fill? And he said, yeah, you're downtown. We'll take the fill. And he built Vanier Park with it. He just took the fill, brought it over, and built it. Of course, they might not be able to do that today with the Department of Fisheries, but it worked out. Anyway, things like that. And so my job at the board turned out to be really public affairs, and I had to come up with ideas, things to do at the park board, how to make money. It was always about how to make money, because if we could make some money off of our retail, like we had retail, basically, you know, services that we were offering. Healthy lifestyle, swimming, skating, just going to the park. We didn't want to have paid parking. That was never our idea anywhere. And I see they're starting it out July 1st out at Spanish Bank, which is a very sad thing. Very sad for people who come, especially from the other side of town, with everything in their car, and they have to pay, you know, whatever it's going to be to be there. But so I came up with some ideas. I came up with a Festival of Lights because I thought we did that back in, you know, back east, and we now make something like $2 million a year off a Festival of Lights, but guess what? We don't get to keep all that money because the council will take some of that money. Some of the money goes to regular, you know, to offset other costs. But this is what's been happening with the city all along. But between 1973 and about 1990 something, we had the first team, and I really have to tip my hat to team because Art Phillips and all that group, and your dad, did amazing things in the city. And the park board was never stronger. They were so respected. They got a global budget at that time. They got this amount, you do whatever you want with it, but that was all rescinded in about 2008. So we had a very good period. So I think that in the last, since maybe the last 14, 15 years, with the new city manager that came in around that time, they basically said, we want our departments to be more efficient. The park board had its own maintenance department. It had its own playground development department. They didn't outsource a lot of stuff. They did it themselves. And what they did was they took away our maintenance department and through attrition and sort of combined it with their maintenance department, which meant that there were people who had only maybe looked after Carnegie Community Center downtown, but never had looked at Kitsilano Pool or the Vancouver Aquatic Center, which are very complicated systems. We had people that worked on these things their entire career at the park board. They were all gone. And now we, the park board, are blamed, not me anymore, but the park board is blamed for things falling apart. Kids' pool. Well, if that kids' pool storm 3 years ago had happened, the park board would have fixed it that spring. It's not fixed yet. That's 3 years ago. Now they're saying we need a new pool. I mean, it's ridiculous. And it's ridiculous that it's not open this summer. So I swim there. Right? And the Vancouver Aquatic Center. We had a guy named Ian Frew who did complete inspections twice a year on all the major facilities, and it was all written down in annual reports. Are there annual reports like that anymore? No annual reports. But the other thing about the park board was, given the sense that they had so little money, they did things incrementally. They built the seawall incrementally, starting in about 1929. They got some money, made it more. They cleared English Bay Beach, which had houses and hotels on it, the entire width, up from Sunset Beach to Stanley Park. They got a little bit of money, they tore them down, opened them up. It took till about 1980 to get that done. Their next thing that they wanted to do was to go along Point Grey Road. They talked to Ray Spaxman at that time, and they said to Ray Spaxman, the head planner, we want you not to issue any planning permits anymore along building permits along Point Grey Road, so that we can gradually, with our acquisition budget, which was only about $1 million a year, pick it up as it came along. And we had donations along the way, like Gene Beatty sold the property to us at a very reduced rate. And you can see the names on the parks along there. We were doing fairly well when there was a change of government. And that was about, the late 90s or something. And then that was it. They canceled that, so there was no more, anybody could build anything they wanted on Point Grey Road, so there was no incentive for us because we couldn't afford it anymore. So all of these things, and another example, I have to just tell you the story. Van Dusen Gardens was obviously, any of you who are of an age might know that was the Shaughnessy Golf Course, right? Yeah. And the old Shaughnessy Golf Course, as it's called. But of course, it was really an incentive for the Canadian Pacific Railway to build the railway across the country. The federal government, the provincial government gave them land all along the way so that they would just give them money to, sell it later and make some money off of their investment. Well, this was one of them. Queen Elizabeth Park property was another one. Langara Golf Course was another one. Anyway, it came to the park board's attention in about 1967 that the Marathon Realty, which is the realty arm of the CPR, was going to develop that property. They were kicking out the golf course, and it was about 70 acres, and they were going to develop it. And the park board went, Mr. LeFaux went almost crazy because that's a beautiful piece of property. So he, along with the commissioners, mainly the commissioners, and an ex-commissioner, Grace McCarthy, who was in the government at that time, and Save Our Parkland Association, all these people got together and they lobbied the provincial government and to get $1 million, and they lobbied the city itself to get $1 million, and then they lobbied W.J. Van Dusen, who was one of the troika of Macmillan Bloedel. He was a financier, for Macmillan Bloedel, and he gave $1 million, and that's why it's named Van Dusen Gardens. So for $3 million, we bought 55 acres and made a beautiful botanical garden. Now, that's what the elected park board did, right? These are the kinds of things they did. And I'll never forget the day, I have to tell you the story, it's so cute. The day we opened it, and this is 1975, and I've only been there a couple of years, and I'm an American by birth, so I had to get it all decorated, right? And so Roy Forster comes out to me and he says, what's all the red, white, and blue bunting on the and I said, well, isn't that just, I'm young, right? And he said, no, that's the U.S. color. I said, well, okay. Oh. So then when I went to meet Mr. Van Dusen, who was about 90, I had to escort him in, right? And he looks at the red, white, and blue bunting and he says, how thoughtful of you to use the Dutch colors. And then Dave Barrett is now the premier, right? Not the government that got the money for us, right? Dave Barrett's there. He charmed everybody when he got up and he said, the last time I was here, I was a caddy. Anyway, before you throw me off, I just want to name a few of the people who've been on the park board that have made, I think, impressions in the world. There was Jonathan Rogers, who was an amazing man. There was W.C. Shelley, who at one point, when he was chairman, and a piece of land came up, and the park board didn't have enough money, he took it out of his pocket, several $1,000s, and bought it for the park board. There was G. Eldon, who was once the superintendent, who was the only staff person who became was an elected official, too. There was Angela Branca, a very famous judge and lawyer. There was CBK Van Norman, who was the architect of my old 1939 house and an architect in Vancouver. There was Fred Cyclone Taylor, who did amazing things. There was Alice Towney, the first woman back in the 1920s, and George Wainborn, the longest, 38 years. And there was Iris Hardwick, the grandmother of our friend here. So lots going on, but I'll leave you with something that's one of my favorite quotes, because an elected board is better than any kind of board, and we're just a stumbling block for the city. That's why they want to get rid of it, because they want to develop parks that aren't permanent parks, parks that have been sort of granted to the city for park purposes, and they never turn them over, like Hastings Park. I'll tell you right now, that'll be a big commercial center. There'll be no park left there. And even Langara Golf Course. There's so many places, but I'll go with this. We like a government that's of the people, by the people, and for the people. That is the most important thing. An elected board is always better than a non-elected board. Anyway, thank you.